In this video clips, we'll take a look at the central processing unit. This is a very important component inside computers and IT gadgets. For example, in the mobile phone or smartwatch. CPU has been using for a long time. For example, about 40 years ago, Intel released 8086, which is come in a size of about 5.5 centimeters. It's quite amazing at that time because it can provide computation very fast. About 20 years later, Intel released Pentium CPU, which is much more advanced than its predecessors. And even though the size is about the same, it contains much more circuits inside the CPU. Let's take a look at the internally of the CPU. At the middle of the CPU package, it contains the integrated circuit. Usually we call it CPU die. Inside the CPU die, it has several transistors connecting together to perform the execution and computation. In the case of Intel 8086, they put about 29,000 transistors in the CPU die. This is due to the limitation in terms of the manufacturing and the size of the transistor at that time. If you take a look at the die, you will see that there are several parts or components inside the CPU, which we will discuss in the next video clip. Recently, about 2-3 years ago, Intel released Core i7 as well, which is much more advanced than what they released 40 years ago. Intel Core i7 Haswell-E pack about 2.6 billion transistors in the CPU die. The more transistors you have in the CPU die, the more advanced and more complex the CPU is. For example, for the Haswell, they have several cores, actually up to 8 cores. The CPU cores, you can imagine as it like a small CPU inside the CPU. These cores can be executed in parallel or concurrently. So you see that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8 cores can run simultaneously. So you can think of you have 8 mini CPUs inside. In addition, not only they have core inside the CPU die, they have other stuff. For example, memory controller to connect to the outside memory. They have cache to help the CPU execute faster. And they have I/O controller and other stuff. If we take a look at several types of CPUs, you see the difference and the change over year. For example, 1886, released in 1978, its clock speed is only 10 megahertz. The clock speed, actually the CPU can perform when it got supplied the clock, and the clock speed actually dictate the speed of execution of the CPU. For Intel 8086, they have only one core. And the transistor count, as I said, is about only 30,000. And the maximum memory size is about only 1 megabyte. In 1993, Intel Pentium, the clock speed is about 6 times faster than 8086. And still, you still have only one core CPU, but the transistor count, they have many more transistors inside the CPU die, something like 3 million transistors. And the maximum memory size is about 4 gigabytes. For Haswell, the clock speed is up to 3.5 gigahertz. It has 8 CPU cores and about 2.6 billion transistors with the maximum memory size about 128 gigabytes. The CPU is not only for the general computation, just like those 3 CPUs I mentioned. There are some other types of CPU, for example, graphic processors or GPU. For the NVIDIA, 2 years ago they released GTX Titan Series, which basically 2 CPU packing in one package. The NVIDIA GeForce GTX Titan Series have maximum clock speed about 1 gigahertz. Interestingly, if you compare the clock speed, is much more slower than the Core i7. However, it has lots more cores. For example, they have the GTX Titan series have 2 sets of 2,880 GPU cores, comparing to the Core i7 which has only 8 cores. You see that they have the GeForce has many more cores. The reason is that for graphic processing, usually the jobs or the tasks to compute are simple tasks, but you have to compute all pixels on the screen. That means you have lots and lots of simple tasks. So you need simpler CPUs than the most general CPU, but you need lots of it. The transistor count about 3 times than the Haswell, about 7 billion, and the maximum memory size is about 6 gigabytes. Let's take a look at one of the popular game consoles is a Sony PS4. The PS4 using AMD Jaguar, and also this CPU is being used in the Xbox One too. Okay. Its clock speed is about 2 gigahertz. However, if you take a look at the cores, they have 8 general CPU cores and 128 graphic processor GPU cores. You see that for the game console, they need both general processing power and also the graphic processing powers. So the maximum memory size is about 128 gigabytes. How about some gadgets? For example, for the Google Glass, internally they use TI OMAP 4430, which is an ARM CPU. Clock speed is about 1.2 gigahertz, and it has only 2 CPU cores and 1 GPU core. And lastly, we have Apple S1, which is something like a set of components, including CPU inside, is being used in the Apple Watch. The clock speed is much slower than the others, about 520 megahertz, and it has only 1 core. The reason is that for gadgets, there are some needs about power conservation. and also the heat emission. The faster the clock speed you have, the more power you consume, and the more heat it will be emitted from the CPU. So for gadgets like Google Glass or Apple Watch, usually we don't put high performance CPU inside, but we put a special CPU that's something like low power consumption, which usually can do the job.